Hello, everyone. This is Deborah. I'm coming to you from my office, which I share with my older daughter. That's her desk back there. She's a psychology student. And I'm going to read to you a section from my short story, The Poisoned Crown. I've been thinking about what I wanted to tell you about it. I wrote it for a Sword and Sorcerer's volume, number 29. Not that that makes any difference. And at the time, what I had in mind was that I was, I just got a mosquito, that I was tired of swordswomen whose solution to every problem was to bash things with their swords. And I wanted to show a character that was using her experience and her mind, her wit, to what came out was deeper than that. And the story is essentially about healing from grief. So we have the iconic story where a character, a physically, martially, artsy, competent character, has suffered a loss. And instead of grieving, they go out and they exact revenge and they bash people with swords. And I wanted to show a different way out of that. And one of the things that I've learned about grief in my own life is that there is a time to pull into ourselves and be quiet and let that kind of healing and experiencing what we've lost happen. And there is a time to re-engage with the world. And the best way to do that is to help somebody else. So without further ado, I'm going to read to you the opening of The Poisoned Crown. Spring came late to Erenjar, capital of the kingdom bearing the same name, and for days on end, storm clouds obscured the sun. Damp penetrated the wooden walls of the poorer districts, in which was situated an inn often frequented by soldiers, too old or crippled to work. In one of the few private chambers, a meager fire subsided into a heap of ashes. A woman of middle years, but with a soldier's strong build, sat before the hearth, carefully facing the door, wrapped in a palace guard's cloak. At the sound of footsteps outside, she reached for the sword that lay, still sheathed, at her feet. "Venice, it's me. May I come in?" "You need not ask." The latch lifted, and Jessir, Prince of Erenjar, entered. Venice relaxed against the back of the chair, for Jessir was one of the few people in the city against whom she need not be on guard. She had held him when he was but a few hours old, taken up from the body of the mother who died birthing him. His father had met her gaze, each of them astonished at seeing a newborn babe. The memory still had the power to melt her heart. When Venice moved to rise, Jessir protested, "Please do not overtax yourself on my account. I recently learned how ill you've been." Nevertheless, Venice got to her feet. "Please," he said again. Venice sensed the distress behind that single word. "Tell me," she said, managing a smile as she sat down. He responded with an engaging smile. "You were the most loyal of my father's guards." His voice broke, and Venice imagined him thinking, "I miss him so much." "He doesn't know. He must never know." "I needed to see for myself how you fared," he said. "I would have visited earlier had I known where you were. I thought you might have returned home. Karanja province?" "No," she said. "I've been here." On the day Jessir's stepmother, the dowager consort, had been declared regent, Venice had resigned from the palace guards. Princess Emilianara of Karatha could not, by law and custom, be crowned queen, but that did not prevent her from putting her own people into positions of power and forcing out everyone else. "I should have done more than resign." In the throes of the lung fever, Venice had almost come to plunging a dagger through her heart, the same dagger the king had given her on the night they first lay in each other's arms. She had taken it out, run her fingers along the length of steel, and felt for the space between her ribs. In the end, she had trusted the fever to do its work. It had failed her. "What brings you to my door, Your Highness?" "Jess. Call me Jess, as you used to." Venice capitulated. "Well then, Jess, what can I do for you?" "I've come to ask a favor." With one hand, Venice indicated the poor quality of the room, silently questioning what she could offer him. He lowered himself to the edge of the pallet bed. "You served my father as advisor as well as palace guard. I want you to do the same for me." So like his father, coming straight to the point. Venice restrained a sigh. "I've got to stop thinking like that. Bernard is gone, and I must live what remains of my life without him." "As you see, I'm hardly fit for duty," she pointed out. "Not my physical protection. At least, I hope it won't come to that." He shifted on the wooden frame. "I need people I can trust, people with experience and wisdom, now rather than waiting for my coronation." Venice nodded, thinking how many others would care only for the pomp and luxury of the throne and not the responsibilities it carried. "The thing is," and here Jessir leaned forward, elbows on his knees, "I'm not entirely sure the coronation is actually going to take place. Every time I ask about preparations, my stepmother puts me off, says not to trouble myself about it, or gets irate that I'm questioning her competence as regent." Denise thought that if Emilianara was fobbing the heir to the throne off with arguments like that, she deserved to have her competence questioned. "So you're determined to prepare yourself as best you can?" "No," he shook his head, "as best as we can." A feeling stirred inside Venice, one she thought was gone forever. Bernard had had a gift for bringing people together, even those who had been his adversaries. Her answer was already decided. "You will, of course, be given quarters in the palace." "I will, of course, decline the offer." At his questioning look, she explained, "If you do need a bodyguard, I'll bed down in the outer chamber of your quarters, or cross your threshold, as Bernard used to joke. But as that is not yet the case, it's best that I am free to come and go and observe." "You probably won't want to wear your old uniform then, even with a badge of my personal service?" She would need a reason to be in the palace without having to explain her position to every cadet she encountered in the hallways. "I'll take the badge," she said, "and have a word with the captain." "Done. Although the old captain retired just after you did." Jessir named the replacement, a man Venice didn't know well, but thought reasonably competent. After Jessir took his leave, Venice gazed into the glow of the embers for a long time. That same day, Venice resumed her sword practice and began walking in the city. Her body needed the exercise to recover strength after her illness, but more than that, she needed to reacquaint herself with the world beyond her chamber. Last night's storm had passed, leaving the day fresh and mild. Despite the new paint on the shops and the ribbons in the manes of the ladies' horses, Venice noticed an unease in the streets. It was not unusual for country folk to make their way to Erenjar during the winter months, but too many of these people looked like foreigners, Zoloans by their complexions. Venice had learned soldiering in the border skirmishes there until Bernard's treaty brought peace. The closer Venice got to the palace, the more angry mutterings she heard. At the head of a rough procession marched a man in formal robes, some kind of clerk. There was a ruckus at the front gate, where the clerk was questioned by the palace guards before being admitted. Most of the crowd dispersed, leaving only a scattering of men. Venice walked up to one of them, a thin, haggard older fellow. On the side of his neck, she recognized the tattoo of a Zoloan adult, a man of standing. "Grandfather?" she asked politely in the Zal tongue, a bit awkwardly because she had not spoken it in so many years. "Can you tell me what's going on?" The old man's expression softened, but not the hollows around his eyes. "We want only what was promised us, aid in times of hunger." Brinar had hoped to stabilize relations between the two kingdoms by promising food during the harsh Zoloan winters. I don't understand," she said. "Why was the treaty not honored?" The man glanced toward the palace gate. "We took up a collection, more than we could afford, and hired a scribe to write our words down. A petition, he called it." Petitioning the Dowager Regent to fulfill her late husband's promises? It made no sense that Emilianara would refuse to help Zoloa, for her own people, the Carathans, were closely related, even in the design of their tattoos. Venice recalled the Zoloan expressions of wishes for health and peace, and they went their separate ways. The next day, Venice presented herself to the same palace gate she'd used while on active guard duty. She wore her best clothing, and that was none too good, the leather jacket and pants being scuffed with wear, but her sword was impeccably clean and sharp. One of the guards, the son of her old captain, recognized her and would have admitted her even without Jessir's badge. The other man was new. "You thinking to rejoin?" the unfamiliar guard asked. Denise shook her head. "I'm here on special assignment, nothing more. I'm done with the old life." Taking her leave, Venice hurried along the familiar back stairs to the wing of the palace housing the royal quarters. Jessir had kept his old suite down a wide hallway from the spacious quarters once occupied by his father. Dismissing his attendants, Jessir led the way into the inner sitting room. "Any trouble? Would you like a drink? Or is it proper to offer you one?" No, and of course it is not. I'm on duty even if I'm not in uniform." "Please sit down anyway. You've been out on the streets, I suppose, and heard about the petition yesterday." Venice nodded but remained standing. "My stepmother's in a fury, at least that's the palace gossip. I heard it from my valet. She's not talking to me about it, or wasn't. I hope this evening's dinner will mark a change. She's been hinting she's willing to go forward with the coronation plans, or at very least include me in discussions of matters of state." A short time later, Venice found herself standing a half pace behind Jessir's left shoulder in the royal dining hall and trying not to remember how Bernard preferred simple meals in his own quarters. The table was sumptuously set for 12, and the hall bustled with servants and personal attendants. Venice didn't know most of the dinner guests, except for a general who had been past retirement age when she had left soldiering for the palace guards. She had heard about the priestess and also the two brothers from important trading families, but had never seen them in person before. She noticed who looked and spoke directly to Jessir, and in what manner, who deferred to Emilianara, and who maintained his own position. They're all her puppets, or soon will be. The realization made Venice sad that Bernard had married such a creature. That marriage, like everything else he'd done, had been for Erenjar's sake, for the secure border that an alliance with a Carathan princess brought. Well, almost everything he did. Venice noticed, too, the deftness with which Jessir maneuvered the conversation to the topic of his having achieved his majority, the age at which he was entitled to take the throne, all the while partaking only of those foods his stepmother had first eaten. "Well, my dear," Amelia said in the pause before the dessert wine, "you must be impatient to take up your new duties." Denise saw the shift in Jessir's posture. He was thinking that at last his stepmother was going to agree to the coronation. Of course, you must ascend to your father's throne at the proper time, Emilianara continued, gesturing with her wine glass. The fine crystal caught the light from the banks of candles. The wine was red, very dark. The people expect no less. The gods expect no less. Around the table, heads nodded. Stewards poured more wine. I will strive to be a worthy successor, Jessir said. That you have already attained such wisdom at such a young age speaks well for you, my dear. But you are indeed young, and a young person must seek counsel from those wiser and more experienced. Don't you agree? Carefully, Jessir said. I agree that good decisions come from discussion and deliberation. Even the choice of such advisors must be made under the guidance of one's elders. This is why I have created. Emilianara indicated the assembled guests. Venice noted that all eyes went not to Jessir, but to Emilianara. She's waiting for him to agree. And there was no way Venice could warn him not to. This wasn't one of those occasions when a person, certainly not the young heir to the throne, could acquiesce for the sake of expediency and then change his mind. In this company, his next words would amount to an oath. I am honored by the very great service you offer, stepmother, Jessir said. My father always said that a king is measured not by his own wisdom, but by that of the people he surrounds himself with. I will begin as I mean to go on, by selecting my own advisors. Emilianara set down her wineglass and fanned her face with her fingers. Venice's gorge rose, as it sometimes did in the moment before a fight. I would not presume to dictate what you must do, Emilianara said with a laugh like crystal tinkling. I have only your best interest at heart, my dear. I merely sought to present you with the best candidates, for your approval, of course. With each repetition of my dear, Venice wanted to wring the other woman's neck. She was taken aback by the intensity of her anger. Other than making Brynar's private life a misery, Emilianara had done nothing wrong. Why then did Venice feel sick in her belly as she did before battle? Why did her hand move to draw steel here at the royal dinner table? She came back to herself a moment later as Jessir was reassuring the Dowager Regent that he would give her suggestions the consideration they merited. Jessir said nothing until the door to his suite was closed, although he was ashen and sweating. He waved away his valet, saying that he would call for assistance when required. I don't think we've heard the end of this, he said. I doubt the Dowager Regent will give up just because you have said no thank you, Venice observed. You did well to avoid antagonizing her with a public refusal. I've learned that lesson well enough. When she realizes I won't accept her lackeys, the real trouble will begin. I've always followed the advice to pick your battles carefully, Venice said, taking the chair he gestured her to. Save your best troops for the critical points, and always keep something in reserve. Avoid committing too many of your resources at the beginning unless you mean to overcome all resistance in a single, bold move. Do you understand what I'm saying? Jessir frowned. That I should go along with what she wants until after the coronation? No, not that. But if some of her candidates are tolerable, give her a small victory. I know something of a few of her choices and can make inquiries, discreetly, of course, from the sources I trust about the others. Jessir paused, reflecting. General Peniagua does not strike me as nearly as pernicious as the Baron. I agree, as long as you do not depend on him for military advice. For that, I have you. Venice shook her head. I have fought as a soldier, true, but never directed an army. Let us pray I never have need then. Indeed, Venise hesitated. Jessier knew about the Zuluan refugees, but perhaps he did not realize how dangerous the situation was and how quickly it might escalate into conflict. Wars usually boil down to one side needing what the other side had, and there was no more potent motivation than hunger. I will deal with that when I am king, Jessier replied when she explained her concern. Jess, Your Highness, I do not think it wise to wait so long. If Zuluans have already made their way here, confident that their petitions would be heard, how many more at home are growing more desperate every day? And how will they respond when their countrymen return empty-handed? We spoke earlier about choosing battles carefully. I think this is one that must be solved before it becomes a battle, even if it means confronting my stepmother while she still holds the regency. Not confronting, discussing, compromising, especially if you are willing to accept one or two of her suggested advisors. You will be in a position to demand something in return, that something being fulfilling an existing treaty. I can call upon my father's memory, I suppose, Jessier said. Whatever arguments you make, think of bargaining in the market. One party gives a little, the other offers a bit more in exchange for some other concession. You've just described my father's council meetings. Since you advised me to do so, I will see what can be done. But I want you there with me. You don't have to say anything or explain why you're there. I want to make a certain, shall we say, point with my stepmother. And if you want to know what happens next, the story will go up as a standalone ebook on June 1st, and I hope you enjoy it. Be well, stay safe, enjoy the coming summer.